Trapasso, CBS Sports NFL Draft and Player Analyst here on the Wester Hotline for his weekly visit. Yeah, I've said a few times this week, and I want to try this out on you, that the way this draft is being talked about as far as like the quality of prospects available from, say, I don't know if it's the midpoint of round one or even a little bit earlier than that, well into Friday here. I don't know how far that plateau is thought to extend, but and maybe you can tell me. But given that it's at least, say, from like 15 to maybe player 50 or 60, that there's, probably not going to be a lot of uniformity in teams' boards out there, because a lot of these prospects are maybe very closely ranked and going to be differently ranked by different teams. Come draft night, as soon as Thursday, round one, I feel like we're probably going to see maybe as many as ever players picked that you're like, man, I've seen him mocked in the second or third round. And conversely, you'll see players on Friday, maybe even into round three. They're like, man, it reminds me of Osiris Torrance 2 years ago, where a lot of Bills fans, we certainly, I'm sure, talked to you about him as an idea for the Bills, whatever number they were picking at that year. They ended up moving up a couple spots and getting Kincaid, or maybe just one spot and getting Kincaid, and then got Osiris Torrance on the way back in round two. I feel like that is almost certainly going to happen this year, where there's going to be guys that you and a lot of other analysts and fans thought were going on Thursday that last until Friday night.
1,000,000%, and this is a perfect segue. Like, that happens every year. It's a perfect segue for something that I wanted to, not get off my chest, but I think was important to say pre-draft, in that I think when you're having me on, you're having 5 or 6, 7 other analysts, there needs to be a wider range of top 32 big boards or first-round prospects. I think we don't really mean to do it. I mean, I make a concerted effort not to fall into the echo chamber, but I think when we get to, like you're mentioning, we get to, say, the first round of 2023, and we think, oh, Osiris Torrance, everyone has him as a first-rounder. He's definitely going there. And then he's the 56th or 58th pick, whatever he was in the draft. Thinking back, we have to realize that we should have different opinions on these players. And if you don't have Omarion Hampton as your number 2 running back, that shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, like, how do you not have that? Everyone else does. Right. We all see things differently. And that's not, any dig on Mike for saying something to me last week about it, but it just sparked my thought of I think it's easy to follow the Mel Kipers and the Daniel Jeremiahs and see, oh man, like he has Matthew Golden this high. Like, I need to have him high too. No, just do your own evaluation. That's what I try to do.
Yep.
And if I have guys a little higher, a little lower, it kind of gels with what we ultimately see. There'll be guys like you're mentioning in the third round, maybe even into the fourth round, where we saw in the early second in a lot of mock drafts, or in the early second of a lot of people's big boards. So I think I'm welcoming hearing different opinions from other people, and I think with so many people diving in evaluation-wise to the NFL draft, even more than there was 5 or 10 years ago, there should be a wider range, because that's where we're ultimately going to see it happen when the actual draft gets here.
Yeah, I'm sorry if this is turning into like a behind the music with Chris Trapasso about your process, but the way you're talking now, it begs another question that I'm curious about. Like, do you? Because I'll just tell you, for me, when I first started, I mean, I've been at this since '95, so it's been a while. I listened and watched a lot of this sort of content. And there was a point, I don't know when it was, I can't remember, like a line of demarcation or some certain specific, incident or game or set of opinions that turned me this way. I try to take in less of that now, because I feel like I want to have my own opinion, and and if it matches an opinion that, I don't know, Christopher Russo has or something, I want to be ignorant of that. You know what I mean? Like, I want to arrive at that conclusion honestly, or that opinion honestly, rather than be influenced by people that are way above me on the on the ladder, so to speak. Do you do the same? Do you got to put on blinders to an extent to not be influenced by, the kingpins in your industry?
Yeah, Bulldog, we could not be in any more of agreement with this. That's totally what I try to do, because I've realized that there are those quote-unquote leaders at the top and the people that really can create or tank a draft stock if they don't like a player or they do love a player. So I'm not going to say that I've never looked at a Daniel Jeremiah big board, but with my evaluations that I really I'm a purist when it comes to them. I want to be able to talk on this show, people to read on CBS Sports or on Twitter, my genuine evaluations. Feel free to disagree, but it is not anything, as much as it's humanly possible to remove bias. I don't want to be part of the echo chamber whatsoever. So that's why I love Jack Bash as a first-round pick, and I don't love Jahdae Barron from Texas in the first round. And that means not that there will be picked there. It just means that I view them as a lesser prospect. And then you could even look back and realize it's not ultimately where these players are picked. And oftentimes the seventh or eighth wide receiver is the best one, not the second or third. It's not, to me, ultimately where you're selected. Although I think because we are so much in mock draft world these days, that it's almost like the finish line for a lot of people is, oh, how high did they get picked? When in reality, we all know of the 32 first-round picks, probably 16 or more will ultimately be players that don't live up to that hype, and we'll look in the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth round for the Khalil Shakirs and the Christian Benfords and the L'Jarius Sneeds that were all picked later that in a redraft would have easily been first-rounders. So that's more of how I look at it. I try to do that and give my own authentic evaluations for all of these players.
Chris Trapasso, CBS Sports NFL Draft and NFL Player Analyst on the Western Hotline for his weekly visit here during this part of the season. He's not on year round; that would be weird. Once we get to March, Chris is generous enough to give us a weekly look at how he's going about this. All right, well let's try this approach as we get into the Bills, and I hope I save enough time at the end here. I want to get maybe your general thoughts on the class of quarterbacks overall, because that's always, a sexy position to talk about, even though this year the prospects don't seem to be up to the standard we've seen for maybe the last few years. With the Bills at 30 and then the 2 second-round picks, realistically, how should you, I don't know, expect is too strong probably. Well, you tell me. Should we expect the Bills to come out of that with starting, like at 30, should they almost without question get a player that can be plugged into the lineup and start for them, or at least play meaningful minutes? And furthermore, how about those 2 second-round picks? Like, how realistic is it to think they'll come out with 3 starters?
I think it's very realistic. I mean, anytime you have 3 picks in the top 62 like the Bills have, and it is a very deep, if we're really looking at it from like a 100,000-foot view, it's a very good and deep defensive class. There's a lot of corners who are good that feel like mostly second-round picks because of the injuries. We've talked about them. Defensive tackle, whether they go there at 30 or 56 or they trade up or 62, yes, the defensive tackle class has enough top-tier depth in terms of, not your Mason Grahams necessarily, but anyone after that, like you're mentioning. Teams might love Derek Harmon as like a top 15 talent. Other teams might have him as like a late second. And then the edge rusher position is the same, where you have your blue chip guy, you have your Abdul Carter. After that, I wouldn't be surprised if James Pierce from Tennessee, who I love, is like the 11th overall pick to the 49ers, or he's the Bills pick at 56. So I think seriously, those 3 positions specifically in this draft, because we don't have these 4 or 5 or 6 big-time talents at any of those positions in this class outside of maybe the tackle a little bit, yes, that they can still pick that player, whether it's corner, defensive tackle, or edge, and I'm going to be specific with those 3 and still feel like we're getting a starter if you're the Bills. Like they got Osiris Torrance in round 2, plugged him in, and he's been a 1,000-snap starter ever since.
Yeah. Well, it's awfully convenient that I think, well, you tell me, it feels to me like the 3 most important positions for the Bills are the 3 you mentioned: corner, D-tackle, defensive end. I think I would prioritize them in that order myself too. How about you?
Yeah, I would go corner, D-tackle, defensive end. Yeah. So I mean, if you're off a little bit on that, then I don't think it's totally crazy. And we have to remember that teams don't always just address their biggest need in round 1. That's kind of sort of what the Bills have done, but I don't think they're totally going to always adhere to that philosophy, that if there's a really good edge still available, and they're like, all right, we feel better about the depth at D tackle and the depth at corner that I mentioned, and we're going to go there. So, yeah, I would say those three are the biggest needs. And like I said, it really feels like, especially in round 2 at corner and edge, also defensive tackle too, that's where like the bulk of we're going to see players come off the board, where again, these names, the Trey Amos and the Savon Revel that we're like assuming are just first round picks guaranteed, they may not ultimately be selected in the first round. And then maybe we're talking about a Bills potential trade up from 56. So yes, I think those three positions are the biggest needs, and they will be able to get starters with those first three selections in this draft.
Right, and I suppose the order that they prioritize those is, it's hard to predict because you don't know,
exactly
where the run is going to be. Like if corners start going, then maybe you better get one at 30. But if it's the other way around, if it's defensive tackles, then same thing. So you're going to have to be flexible there. How do you feel about Revel? He's someone, 6'2", 194. I know there's a September ACL injury that could be a little scary to some teams or even some fans looking at this. How do you feel about this player?
I absolutely love him on film. So all of my evaluations, like this is kind of a branch off of me saying that I try to be as authentic as possible. I just give any evaluations, whether it's written or I'm talking it or whatever, is just based on what I see on the field. So like if the player is healthy, here's what I think. Revel to me is a top 20 talent in the class. Like you mentioned, tall, long arms. There is some stiffness when he's changing directions because he's like doesn't have that low center of gravity, but finding the football in the air, he's as good as any player in this class. He can play man. He made plays in off coverage where he could just watch and plant and drive on the football. So I think with bringing back Dane Jackson maybe raises the floor a little bit of the cornerback room and would maybe give the Bills less hesitation to pick someone like Revel, who's maybe not going to be ready week 1, but by November, December, January, which has really become those money months for this team, would be ready and could kind of get up to speed before the Bills are in the playoffs.
One other DB I want to ask you about, or really a position in general, because as we've talked about already earlier in the conversation, the avoiding the echo chamber and, diversity of opinion. I've referenced John Ledgard, who I'm sure you're aware of him. We've had him on our shows many times over the years. I've got him on one side talking about this safety class, not really liking any of the guys as first-round prospects. And then on the other side, I've got Greg Cosell talking about both Starks and Emin as like day one starters. You can do just about everything you need to do at the position, anything you want to ask them to do. And I think we've talked about Emin this way with you already, maybe even as recently as last week. How do you feel about the safety class? I know it's not the biggest need for the Bills, but you know me, I'm crushing on Emin and have been since the minute I saw his vitals, and then that only went higher with the combine performance. How do you feel about the safety class overall?
It's pretty top-heavy, but fortunately for the Bills, I think it aligns with if we are going to say that safety is maybe the 4th or 5th biggest need, meaning that they wouldn't need to pick that player until the 4th or the 5th round just to add some depth, kind of take a flyer on a player. That's where it feels like a lot of these safeties are ultimately going to go. If we're talking at the top, I think it is very top-heavy. I would side more with Greg Cosell than John, and that's completely fine. It's good to have, like you're saying, that diversity of opinion. I think Malachi Starks maybe is a little overrated just because he has the Georgia pedigree and he was there for multiple seasons. That I think it's easy to just say, oh, he's a Georgia safety playing for Kirby Smart, who's a disciple of Nick Saban. He's going to be great. I think there are some concerns about his overall athleticism. I mean, we didn't see a crazy workout in Indy or at the Georgia Pro Day, but what he does on the field, he's everywhere. He's rarely missing a tackle. And you and I see eye to eye on Amanwari that I think he is every bit a Jeremy Chin, Kyle Hamilton type, and he can make plays down the field. He's not just a box linebacker safety type. So I think those two in essentially any draft would be first-round safeties. I even like Kevin Winston a lot from Penn State, who's another one coming off an injury. If he was not injured, and I think it was in week 2 against West Virginia he went down, so another one, a September injury like Revel, we would be talking about him because he's big, super athletic, great tackler, and made some plays in coverage as well. So those three, to me, I think in any class would be first-round safeties.
I mentioned I wanted to save some time for quarterbacks, so hopefully we'll have enough time to get through a lot of this. Do you know anything, let's start here, about how the league decides who to invite to the draft? Because over the weekend, I've got this Milroe thing, right? I think we've probably have talked about this. I feel like one team at least is going to fall in love with this guy's skill set. Him being invited to the draft was eye-opening to me because I thought I'd heard this year that the league was trying to be even more selective, more careful about who they invite so as to avoid the specter of a guy sitting there with his family all night long and not getting chosen. So Milroe getting selected to go to the draft and agreeing to go, I don't know, do you think that means they expect him to be chosen on Thursday?
So I don't know exactly how the process works now. I know that the late, great Gil Brandt, who was like a Cowboy scout during the Tom Landry era in the 60s and 70s, who then transitioned over to the media, and he was connected with everybody. He was like the main point man that would talk to GMs and coaches and scouts during the pro day circuit at the combine and then kind of help out the NFL and say, here's who you should invite. I'm assuming there's a team of people probably similar to how the combine invites happen, where like they are working with these directors of college scouting and GMs. But to me, what you're hinting at, I think whoever is ultimately making that decision and pulling the trigger for the NFL has probably heard from enough higher-ups in the NFL, like, yeah, we like Jalen Milroe quite a bit. Like more than, again, the media is expecting him to be a third or a fourth-round pick. I just agree with you, again, that his talent is too tremendous, and there's so much untapped potential. We just saw Jalen Hurts win the Super Bowl, and he was not a finished product whatsoever as a passer, but as a great runner and grew in all of his 4 or 5 seasons there in Philadelphia, and now he has a Super Bowl ring. So it wouldn't be shocking to me if Jalen Milroe was a first-round pick because, like I say all the time, the first round is all about traits, and Milroe absolutely has those. Not just as a runner. He's got a strong arm and made a lot of big-time throws down the field, too.
How about the guys that are generally, I don't know if you share this, rated above him? Dart, Sanders, Ward. Do you think if Milroe gets into the first round, we'll get 3 or 4 quarterbacks chosen in the first, or could Milroe maybe, I don't know, take the place of a Sanders or a Dart in round 1?
He could. I mean, there is a scenario that I don't think is like 10% chance that Shedeur Sanders falls. Like maybe it's all a smokescreen. What I've thought was really interesting, and I was on the podcast with former WGR employee Matthew Collar last night, his Purple Insider, and afterward he told me that he thinks it's interesting, and I agree, that we haven't really heard a lot from Deion Sanders. Early in the process, Deion was saying, we're going to pick where we're going to go, and then suddenly that just came to a screeching halt. And in his mind, that was like maybe someone saying to him, dude, you're not helping. Like this guy is, you're not hyping up you 2.0. Like Shedeur is a fine prospect, but he's not Caleb Williams. He's not Joe Burrow. He's not Trevor Lawrence. So I think that's interesting. And I think from hearing at the Combine that his interview process for really every team did not go well, that he kind of felt like and presented himself like he was Caleb Williams or Trevor Lawrence or Joe Burrow when he's not that level of prospect. So there is a world in which Jalen Milroe and Jackson Dart that are plenty athletic. They have strong arms. They had quality careers in the SEC. Now, obviously, Dart was more productive. The offense was a little more gimmicky, but where they could ultimately be the quarterbacks picked in round 1, and Shedeur Sanders isn't picked there at all. Just think back to 2 years ago. You were seeing mocks 2 or 3 days before the draft that Will Levis was going to be a top 5 pick, and then he wasn't picked until the second round. So
right.
It's happened.
Yeah. How about Cam Ward? Like, is he worthy of number 1 overall? Like, what level of prospect do you consider him to be, Chris?
In this class, I would say he probably is. My comparison that I've landed on, and it took me a while when you hear this name, it's going way back. He reminds me of David Garrard, where David Garrard, I mean, he's not quite as big as Garrard, and maybe he's a little twitchier. He's just kind of a new age version where the level of athleticism at the quarterback spot across the board has been raised. But you watch David Garrard with the Jaguars, those pesky Jaguars teams, and it was like nothing about him stood out. You weren't like, wow, he has such a strong arm, or like, oh my God, he's such a tremendous athlete, or he's super accurate. but he was like above average across the board. And he, won a playoff game in Pittsburgh, was a solid starter for 4 or 5 seasons there in Jacksonville. That's kind of how I view Cam Ward. He's good improvisationally, but he takes a few too many risks. He's decently athletic, but he's not Kyler Murray. He's not in that upper echelon of athlete. And I like how the accuracy has improved throughout his career. So he, like David Garrard, I think is the consummate overachiever, and he's going to have to be an overachiever there in Tennessee with that kind of new startup, a pretty barren roster. I feel like in this class, that's kind of how I view him. If we're going back to last year, I think he would be the 5th or the 6th quarterback in what was a really good quarterback class.
All right, Chris, that's all the time we've got for today. Thank you.